Have you ever wondered how your mother ended up being raised on a dairy farm in the middle of nowhere? In this video, I'm going to attempt to explain. First of all, you probably know that your grandpa, Harold Tracy, ended up marrying Charlotte Judd in 1972. They had both served missions in the Central States North Mission and met each other, not on their mission, but at a missionary reunion for their area years later. And it was there that they raised their 4 daughters. Harold and Charlotte bought the farm from his parents, Wallace Tracy and Viola Chatlin. They lived next door to us pretty much my whole life growing up. They never left the farm. Wallace had bought that farm from his father, William E., and his mother, Mary Ann. But how on earth did William E. and Mary Ann end up at Oliver Springs? Well, it all began with the immigration that came about as a result of the restored church being preached to all different parts of the land. Silas was William E.'s father, and his parents, Caleb and Susanna, were both born in Vermont. After they were married, they moved their family to New York. And it was in New York that their son Moses Tracy heard the gospel, and after being baptized, he shared the message of the gospel with his family, including his little brother Silas, who was about 10 years younger than him. Silas joined the church at age 14, and he married his first wife, Susan, at age 19. Together, he and Susan immigrated to Salt Lake, and then they eventually ended up going from Salt Lake to Ogden, where they settled. It was in Ogden that Fanny met Silas. So how did Fanny get to Ogden? Well, her parents, David and Dorothea, she's also known as Dolly, they came from Illinois. So David was born in North Carolina, and his family moved to Illinois at age 15, and he was baptized in 1839 at the age of 21. His wife, Dolly, was born in New York. Her family moved from Ohio, well, from New York to Ohio, and it was in Ohio that they heard the message of the gospel through a missionary who was preaching in their Methodist chapel. This missionary's name was Solomon Hancock, and her father first joined the church, and then a few months later the rest of the family joined, and they were all baptized by 1831. After they were baptized, their family moved to Kirtland, Ohio, and then they were with the saints when they were forced to move from place to place. So they started in Ohio, in Kirtland, and then they were forced to move to Missouri and then Illinois. And it was in Illinois that she met David, and they got married. Fanny was born in Illinois, and the family left from Nauvoo, Illinois with the saints when she was about 1 year old, and they were with the saints in Council Bluffs, Iowa. And her father served a mission, and they stayed in Mosquito Creek while he was gone. And then when he returned a year later, they all went with the saints to the Salt Lake Valley in 1850, and then on to Ogden in 1851. And so it was about 7 years later, after moving to Ogden, that she met and married Silas. They were married in 1858. She was his third wife. So we talked about Susan, his first wife. His second wife was actually his mother-in-law. And it was just for propriety's sake. The church advised that if this mother-in-law, being single, was to travel with him and his wife, that he should be married to her. So not many people knew about that. But Fanny was his third wife, and she married him at age 14. Silas was 28. and she got along pretty good with with the first wife, Susan. But Silas's older brother Moses ended up passing away, and Moses's widow, whose name was Nancy Taylor, Silas tried to take care of her, from a distance as best as he could, but after a few years, she decided that wasn't enough, and she used scripture to convince him that he needed to marry her. And so he did, and with the three families in the home, that only lasted a few years. Fanny ended up moving with her children to another home down the road. And it was in 1879, after 21 years of marriage, that Fanny decided she'd had enough. So she opted for money instead of land and sheep, and took her and her boys to homestead in Park Valley, Yost area. And then she eventually moved to Almo and Oakley as she got older. But these are her children, and this is William E. His brother Frank was a freighter, and he had a team of horses that he ended up selling so that he could pay passage for the mother and sisters of a woman that he wanted to marry. So he wanted to marry Betsy Holden from England, who had immigrated from England, and she said she couldn't marry him until she had earned enough money to pay the passage for her mom and her sisters to come to America. And so he sold a team of horses to pay for their passage, and William E. told him that was like a really stupid business move. He never should have done that. But the irony of it is that those sisters that came over ended up being his wives. So what happened was Mary Ann's mother, Mary, she was introduced to the gospel in England, and she was baptized in England at age 38 in 1968. Her husband, John Holden, never joined the church in this life, and in 1876 he died. So about 8 years after she died, after she joined the church, he died at age 48. Mary ended up immigrating. Like I said, her older children immigrated first, and Frank, wanting to marry Betsy, paid for Mary and Mary Ann as well as Hannah's passage to America. And William E. first married Mary Ann's older sister, Hannah. They had 2 children, and unfortunately it was during the birth of their second children that Hannah got sick, and she died as a result of childbirth, and so that left him a widow, and Mary Ann took care of her niece and her nephew. Her little nephew only lived for a few months. Their oldest daughter, though, she was old enough that she survived. And so Mary Ann and William E. got married, and they ended up having about 9 children. And one of those children was, there's their marriage date. So one of their children was your grandpa, Wallace, right here. So they lived in not only Yost, but Almo. They traveled a lot. William E. was known for building beautiful homes wherever he lived. He built homes in Almo, which this is one of the homes that he built. It's over at the City of Rocks. This is what it looks like now. And he was also at one time part owner with his brother, Albert, in the Tracy store. I believe that's Albert. So he would fix up a place, homestead it, and then sell it at a profit, and then move on to another one. He was working with your grandpa, Wally, one day, and your grandpa was about 15 or 16 years old, and they weren't getting along. He said his dad was really stubborn and would get after him if he didn't do a job just exactly as he told him to. So they both got in a fight, and Wally took off on during one of those fights and grabbed his stuff and got on a horse and decided that he was done working for his dad. So he rode over the mountain about 1.5 miles into Yost, where he ended up working for Mr. Blythe for 2 years. And then he worked for his brother-in-law as a sheep herder after that. And it was while he was working as a sheep herder that his younger sister, who was 16 at the time, got in a car accident and passed away. So your grandpa was the second to youngest in the family, and he and Edith were pretty close, and that was pretty hard on him. So he was 19, she was 16, and it was at that time that his dad started writing him letters and asking him to come back and help him on the farm. And he told him he was willing to do whatever business deal that Wallace wanted. And so Wally consented and moved back to help his dad. They worked one farm, a dairy, out in a place in Cottonwood Canyon, south of Salt Lake, for about a year, and then they sold that at a profit. And then after they sold that, they moved to Oliver Springs, and that was in 1929. And he would help feed the cows and feed the horses and tend the land while his parents would go to Ogden during the winters. And it was in 1940 that he married Viola. She was 20 and he was 30 years old. And the two families worked side by side together for about 7 years until his parents retired and moved to Oakley, and then he bought the farm from his father. So there you have it. That's how Grandpa Wally ended up buying the Oliver Springs dairy farm. Well, it was a ranch at the time. He introduced the dairy cattle later, who passed it on to Grandpa, and we all know he eventually sold